During the darkest days of World War II, deep penetration strategic bombing missions into the heart of Nazi Germany were often seen as near suicidal, even under the best conditions. With clear weather, fully armed aircraft, and no unforeseen surprises. But now, imagine dangling from the side of a burning bomber at midnight, in freezing air, while enemy fighters are still actively hunting you down. That's not just an impossible mission, it's a test of courage beyond what most people can fathom. And yet, one British airman dared to do exactly that, and lived to tell the extraordinary tale. That night was the early morning of April 27, 1944. The Royal Air Force, RAF, had launched 215 Lancaster heavy bombers and 11 multi-role Mosquito aircraft. All headed toward the same target, Schweinfurt, a city deep within Nazi territory. Schweinfurt was home to several vital ball-bearing factories, the beating heart of the German mechanical industry, and had already been the focus of intense bombing raids the previous year. But this time, the objective was more tactical in nature. The real purpose of the operation was to distract the Germans from a much larger and more critical bombing offensive on Essen, the industrial stronghold of the Ruhr region. Among the ranks of those fearless airmen stood one who would soon distinguish himself in ways no one could have imagined, 25-year-old Sergeant Norman Jackson. Preparing for what would become one of the most unforgettable flights of his life, Jackson had started his military service as a ground technician in North Africa, a role that was far safer than flying into enemy airspace. But in July 1943, he volunteered to join 106th Squadron as a flight engineer, a decision that, even years later, he admitted he couldn't fully explain. "I don't know why," he once said. "I suppose I just wanted to live, really live." And somehow, fate seemed to favor him. Over the course of dozens of perilous sorties, including at least 5 bombing runs over Berlin, the very heart of the Nazi regime, Jackson managed to survive, returning each time as if he'd cheated death itself. His most recent mission had taken him deep into enemy territory, targeting the city of Munich, another key objective in the Reich's war machine. By that point, he had officially completed 30 operational missions, the required number to be relieved from duty and sent home, where his loving wife waited for him. But Jackson didn't take the easy way out, because one of his previous missions had been flown with a different crew. He felt it was only right to finish what he started alongside the crewmates he trusted like brothers. He insisted on flying one final mission with his regular team. And just before takeoff, he received life-changing news. His wife had given birth to their first child. A sweet reward from life, but would he live to meet his newborn? Meanwhile, the Allied bombing strategy was running like clockwork. U.S. Army Air Forces, USAAF, carried out daylight raids to maximize precision, while the RAF launched nighttime attacks to take advantage of the cover of darkness. Flying in the dark meant reduced bombing accuracy, but it also gave crews a slightly better chance of surviving the mission. That night, things began surprisingly smoothly. Jackson and his crew took off from RAF Metheringham in eastern England. After crossing the English Channel, their Lancaster bomber soared into German airspace, maintaining an altitude of around 20.000 feet, roughly 6.100 meters, under the frigid night sky. As they neared their target, the aircraft held steady and successfully dropped its payload right on schedule. Up to that point, the mission had encountered minimal resistance, an unusual but welcome turn of events. But in war, smooth sailing never lasts long. At first, the mission unfolded with an almost suspicious smoothness. After successfully dropping their bombs on target without encountering heavy resistance from German air defenses, the entire Lancaster crew breathed a sigh of relief. No flak bursts, no flashing tracer fire, just an eerie silence deep in the heart of a Germany ablaze with war. But war rarely lets its prey go so easily. As the aircraft turned back toward base, flying through the freezing night sky, danger struck without warning from behind. A German fighter plane emerged from the darkness, silent, fast as lightning, and launched a sudden attack from the rear. Despite the chaos and near-zero visibility, the crew managed to glimpse the silhouette of their attacker, most likely a Focke-Wulf FW-190, a single-seat fighter infamous for terrorizing Allied bombers. The FW-190, armed with a deadly combination of machine guns and 20mm cannons, wasted no time. It unleashed a ruthless volley, ripping through the rear fuselage of the Lancaster with streams of fire and lethal lead. Flight Lieutenant Fred Mifflin, the bomber's pilot, fought to regain control of the aircraft, executing bold evasive maneuvers, even though he knew all too well that the massive, heavy Lancaster was no match for the speed and agility of the smaller fighter. In the torrent of gunfire, Sergeant Norman Jackson was hit by shrapnel and collapsed onto the floor of the aircraft. Blood seeped through his flight suit, and his right leg and shoulder were severely wounded. When he came to amid the chaos, the first thing he noticed wasn't the pain, it was the smell of burning. A fierce fire had erupted on the starboard wing, spreading quickly toward the fuel tank. Jackson didn't need anyone to explain the stakes. If the flames reached the fuel reserve, the entire bomber would explode mid-air, killing the whole crew instantly. Without hesitation, despite his injuries, Jackson sprang into action. After getting permission from Mifflin, who knew they had no other choice, Jackson volunteered to climb out of the aircraft and attempt to extinguish the flames himself. The plan sounded like suicide, at an altitude of over 20,000 feet. In near-freezing temperatures, flying at over 200 miles per hour, and with a German fighter still on their tail, how could any man possibly cling to the outside of a burning bomber and put out the fire? But no one in the crew stopped him, perhaps because they had no better idea. Or maybe because they believed Jackson was the only one both brave and crazy enough to try. Strapping on his parachute, Jackson tucked a small fire extinguisher into his flight jacket and made his way to the emergency hatch, located just above the pilot's head. He opened it, and the freezing outside air and sudden pressure drop tried to suck his body out of the aircraft. Clinging tightly to the hatch frame, Jackson began to pull himself out onto the body of the bomber. Disaster struck immediately. Jackson's parachute suddenly deployed early, the white silk ballooning out like a massive sail and being violently sucked into the cockpit. The force nearly yanked Jackson right off the plane. Chaos erupted as the cockpit filled with fabric. Instruments became tangled, and visibility was completely obstructed. Fortunately, Mifflin and two other crew members, the bomb ame and the navigator, reacted just in time. Working together, they grabbed hold of the parachute cords, anchoring Jackson before he was blown into the black void below. Never had death felt so close, and never had courage burned so brightly in the haunted night sky of wartime Europe. Inch by inch, the remaining crew carefully let out more of the parachute line, allowing Norman Jackson to slowly inch his way along the fuselage toward the starboard wing, which was now engulfed in flames. In the pitch black, with the wind howling furiously around him, every movement became a battle between life and death. Suddenly, Jackson lost his footing. The entire crew could only hold their breath as he flailed in midair, desperately grasping for the edge of an air intake, clinging to the freezing metal, fragile and thin like the last thread of hope. In the chaos, the fire extinguisher slipped from his flight jacket and plummeted into the endless darkness below, taking with it their best chance of extinguishing the fire threatening to consume the aircraft. As if fate hadn't dealt enough of a blow, the German fighter returned, unloading another burst of gunfire toward the Lancaster. Two bullets struck the back of Jackson's legs, sending waves of searing pain through his body. But even that agony paled in comparison to the heat of the flames now licking at his body. The searing metal burned the skin from his hands, and his face began to scorch. And yet, through sheer force of will, Jackson held on, a figure of unimaginable bravery clinging to a burning aircraft, high above enemy territory. Still, even the strongest human spirit has its limits. As the fire raged beyond control and his injuries became unbearable, Jackson had no choice but to let go, his body flung into the roaring slipstream behind the engines. Realizing the situation was hopeless, Pilot Mifflin gave the order for the crew to bail out. Before jumping, they released what remained of Jackson's parachute, now tangled and partially deployed, in a final, desperate hope that it might still save him. Parachutes in those days were made from silk or nylon, materials not known for heat resistance. But it was all Jackson had. As he plunged toward the earth, the flames began to catch on the canopy, turning his descent into something terrifyingly close to a free fall. He hit the ground hard, the impact shattering his ankle. By then, Jackson's body was utterly broken. He suffered extensive shrapnel wounds, Severe burns on both hands. His face scorched, his right eye swollen shut, and his ankle crushed, physically shattered and mentally exhausted. The miracle was that he was still alive, and somehow, he was even conscious enough to drag himself, inch by inch, toward a nearby village. When he finally reached a place with light, he knocked on the door of a small roadside cottage. The door opened, and a man, clearly the homeowner, looked at him suspiciously and shouted, "Churchill's gangster," a scornful insult, filled with anger. But inside the house were the farmer's 2 young daughters, children with kind hearts. They rushed to him, wiping the blood from his face, bandaging his burns, and offering the young airman the first comfort he had felt since falling from the sky. Jackson would later recall the moment with a mix of humor and irony. "I was lying there like a gentleman. I actually started to think I was still pretty lucky." Eventually, he was discovered and captured by German forces. They took Jackson to a hospital, where he spent 10 long months recovering before being transferred to a prisoner of war camp. Even in captivity, Jackson never stopped thinking about freedom. He attempted to escape twice, and on the second try, he succeeded. After breaking out, he wandered across enemy lines and was eventually found by General Patton's Third Army near the city of Munich. Such unimaginable bravery did not go unnoticed. Flight Sergeant Norman Jackson was promoted to warrant officer and personally awarded the Victoria Cross by King George VI himself, the highest military honor Britain can bestow on a soldier. After the war, Jackson returned home, reunited with his beloved wife, and went on to have 6 children. He lived a humble life, working as a traveling whiskey salesman to provide for his family, never boastful, never seeking the spotlight. Though outwardly he appeared ordinary, inside he carried the deep scars of war. The memories were not easily erased. His body bore the permanent marks of his burns, along with invisible wounds of the soul. Jackson once admitted he suffered frequent nightmares, bouts of depression, and that he had never truly escaped those dark nights in the skies over Germany. In 1994, Norman Jackson passed away at the age of 74. Until the very end, he remained humble, always insisting he was just a man doing his job. "I was a flight engineer. My job was to get the crew home safely. I was the most experienced one on board. They looked to me. I couldn't just stand by." The story of Norman Jackson, a man who crawled onto the wing of a burning bomber in the dead of night, is a powerful testament to human endurance, unyielding spirit, and the extraordinary courage people are capable of in the darkest hours of history.